Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on this snowy afternoon. We are here to talk about new frontiers in social media, sharing research with the public. I'm Rachel Appel. I'm the AVP of PR and social media here at BU in the Marcom division. And I'm thrilled to have our panelists here today to share their experiences using Reddit AMAs and Facebook Live. So I'm going to do a little introduction here. Joining us today, we have Liz Crocker, who is a full moderator for the Reddit subreddit Science, which has over 18 million subscribers and features almost daily dialogues between scientists and the public. Liz obtained her PhD from Boston University in cultural anthropology in 2017 and is currently a program associate with AAAS in the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion program. She was also a lead organizer for the March for Science Boston last year, which drew over 70,000 people. She's currently based in DC and enjoys exploring DC's many museums in her spare time. Next, we have Paul Dupre, professor of microbiology and professor of pathology and laboratory medicine at BU's School of Medicine. He's also director of bioimaging at the Needle. A molecular virologist with nearly 25 years experience, he has studied foot and mouth disease, the now eradicated rinderpest virus, measles, mumps, and many more. He is on Twitter at 10Qs, is that correct? 10Qs, and he lists his interests there ranging from understanding vaccines to triathlons and Legos. Next, we have Tammy Vigil. She's a professor of communication studies at BU's College of Communication. Her research interests include political campaign rhetoric and women as political communicators. I asked her if she had a favorite social media moment, and while she didn't categorize it as her favorite, she mentioned Twitter's response to Melania Trump's plagiarized speech and the slew of memes that emerged from it, since it was of particular interest and relevance to her research. And then lastly, I'd like to welcome Dr. Joshua Safer. Dr. Safer serves as the medical director of the Center for Transgender Medicine and Surgery at Boston Medical Center. He's also the director of endocrinology education at Boston University School of Medicine and associate professor of medicine at the BU School of Medicine. Dr. Safer's research focuses on increased access to care for transgender patients and the accompanying health and quality of life benefits. He was recently named executive director of the Center for Transgender Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York, and he mentioned that his anxiety is growing about moving from quiet Brookline to crazy Manhattan. So all of our panelists have used emerging social platforms to shine a light on their areas of research and engage the public. And today we're going to be looking at Reddit AMAs and Facebook Live. Before we dived in, we wanted to get a sense of how many of you are active on Reddit. Few. How many of you have watched or hosted a Facebook Live? Okay, great. So a little bit of background, we wanted to give you just some visuals so you could kind of be grounded in these platforms before we get into our panelists' experience. Reddit is a massive online community. It's home to user-led text-based discussions. It has more than 230 million unique visitors per month, which is more users than Netflix. Reddit features Ask Me Anythings, or AMAs, where the public can engage with experts, thought leaders, or celebrities and ask their questions directly. We wanted to give you a little bit of visual, too, of what it looks like. Perhaps not the most beautiful site on the internet, but it's an opportunity for people to talk about pretty much any subject and engage with other folks, whether they're experts or regular people directly. Next, Facebook Live. It's live streaming service built into Facebook. Anyone can start a live video broadcast from any Facebook page. Viewers can like or react to content and comment or ask questions in real time. Once the broadcast is complete, the video will be published to that page or profile that broadcasted it. We wanted to also give you a little visual. This is one we did earlier this week in advance of the Olympics. It was about sports psychology, and we had Professor Adam Naylor and Micah Ruzioni. So here at BU, we use both platforms to shine a light on the faculty and their experience, and faculty connect directly with highly targeted audience. Whether it's sabermetrics or infectious diseases, we're able to promote our faculty to a niche audience who have already raised their hands and opted in to learn more. And in return, this audience is able to engage directly and in real time with that expert to explore an area of interest. So that's enough for me. I wanted to turn it over to our panelists. And first, I was going to ask Liz if she could give us an overview of your work at Reddit, and then also how you work with scientists and the value that they derive from the platform.
Sure. So I'm a full moderator at AskHistorians, which is the largest platform on the internet for scientists and the public to have direct conversations and engagement. And what we do is we either reach out to scientists if we have a particular idea in mind, or these days a lot of scientists reach out to us directly and schedule something on our calendar. And we send you a login information, we hold your hand through everything, help you come up with a blurb that you would post about who you are, and this sort of sets the conversation tone. On each sub, which is going to be different, there's sort of different focuses and different ways you would engage. And so it helps to think a little bit about science communication. At AAAS, we always frame it as goals, audience, messaging. So you think about why do you want to do science communication, what's important to you, and who do you want to reach. That'll help you determine what sub might be appropriate for you. If you want to teach people about vaccine safety, probably a really broad, big, broad-reaching sub like IMA is appropriate. But there's less moderation, and you can sometimes be competing with celebrities who are also doing an AMA. Other subs, if you have a more focused concern, or you're trying to reach a more niche demographic, or you simply want to make sure it's more heavily moderated so you don't engage with trolls or deal with the kind of backlash you can get on the internet, a sub like ours can be really good. If you're a historian, AskHistorians is fantastic. And then you want to think about your audience, right? Who is there? There's not just one public, there are lots of publics. Social media is a fantastic way to reach various different publics. So Facebook and Reddit may be reaching out to two different demographics, but even within Reddit, there are lots of very focused subs. So you want to work with someone like Rachel to think about who's appropriate and what platforms are appropriate, or doing lots of them, right? Getting your message out to lots of different publics and thinking about what they're interested in. Reddit is a fantastic place to also learn what the general public thinks about your topic. I know when I was a TA here at Boston University, my teaching got a lot better when I started actually researching the subjects I was going to teach about and seeing what questions do the public have about my field, what explanations that other people gave, which ones worked and which ones didn't, right? And then actually jumping in and trying to answer questions myself on subs like Ask Science, or I'm an anthropologist, so Ask Anthropology, and trying to engage in these dialogues made my teaching much better and my public communications in general about my field a lot more effective. So on our sub, we have, like we said, 18 million subscribers. A popular AMA can easily get over 100,000 unique views, and then it stays as a permanent sort of conversation that's happened on the internet. There actually is a nonprofit that gives it a DOI and puts it on a separate place where it gets archived as well. And that allows you, if you're doing grants and you need to talk about how you do public engagement, you can actually cite the DOI in a much more clean-lined, much prettier version of the conversation as well. But it also means you get to do very broad public outreach, get to reach a lot of different people. And we have over 1,400 moderators that help curate and make sure that no one's taking over your conversation, that there's not a big rant about some pseudoscience or anything bigoted or inappropriate happening. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about Reddit and social media and that kind of thing. It's also just a lot of fun. I think everyone who does AMAs with us, we almost always get an email about, this was so much more fun than I thought it would be. So if you've ever thought about it, I highly recommend just doing it. You're also welcome to email me, and I'm happy to have a conversation about your particular interest and how to tailor it to a sub on Reddit.
Thanks, Liz. Paul, do you want to go ahead?
So I thought I would give my experience as, in some ways, an accidental social media person. And my Twitter handle is 10Qs, 10 questions. And what I did whenever I first discovered Twitter was I realized that it could be used as a bottom-up way to organize a meeting. I wanted to organize a meeting in the UK where we would answer the top 10 questions in the field of virology. And what normally happens in a meeting is the great and the good get together in a committee. They decide who are the speakers. They decide what the the customers are going to hear. And individuals come along, they pay a subscription registration, they come to the meeting, and they hear what the great and the good have decided they should hear. And I wanted to totally do an experiment where I asked the community, what are the top 10 questions in virology that you would like answered? And the good thing about this is it reaches a completely different demographic. You engage the community from the start, and we ended up having the most highly rated symposium. This is in the Society for Microbiology, so this is the biggest microbiological society outside the US, where people were engaged with where do viruses come from? Will we ever have a Hollywood pandemic-like contagion happen? And we got the person, the scientific advisor for that Contagion movie to come and speak to that community, and people were engaged. So it's a totally different way. So that's the accidental way that I found myself in social media. And that pattern has occurred again and again and again throughout my time exploring. And essentially, as a scientist, I feel that I can be experimental with social media. I can try something. If it works, we can use it. If it doesn't work, no one really dies. Although you do have to be careful, and I think that then that would be the next point that I would make about an academic being approached to do something on social media. So how do we then get from Twitter, which I use often and I really love, and I've had more connections and invitations to conferences because of my presence on Twitter than I ever imagined. So I would really recommend that as a platform that can be used very effectively. It's a total surprise to me whenever I started it and where I have ended up with Twitter. So then the next thing is we talk about Reddit. Just like Twitter, I really did not know what Reddit was whenever Carol and Margaret from Marcom reached out and said, would you like to do an AMA? And honestly, I didn't know what it was. I thought, what is this? There's National National Immunization Awareness Month. And one of the things I'm really, really passionate about, and I think that social media and the media in general has had a huge part to play in this. It's the installation into the public that vaccines aren't safe because of miscommunication, misreporting, misrepresentation of scientific facts. It's vaccines and how they're perceived can nearly be caricatured as the original fake news. What has been done to decrease the public's acceptance of vaccines because of autism and Crohn's and multiple sclerosis and all of this. So I'm really passionate about defending that, and vaccines work as a hashtag that I would use often on Twitter. So these guys said, would you like to do an AMA? This is what an AMA is, and it's for National Immunisation Awareness Month, and we want you to try and engage with the public and answer some questions about vaccines. And I just didn't know what it was. I didn't know they wanted a photograph. You saw this photograph where we have to sign up, put a sign and say, ask me anything, I am. This was how we validated ourselves. So I took this in needle, and I made one for the guy that I did it with, who is a professor in infectious diseases. And truthfully, we had no clue what we were signed up to. But the second thing that I would say is don't be afraid. If you're an academic and you get approached because you're interested in vaccines, or you're interested in transgender issues, or you're interested in engaging with the public in whatever way, because remember, as academics, the public are the people who pay the taxes that allow the NIH to fund our research. We have a responsibility to do this, and this is why I believe we should engage with the public. It's not just about self-promotion. It's not just about BU promotion. We have a moral issue as scientists and as researchers not to sit and say, you know what, this is too complicated for you, because it's not. And that AMA, one of the things that we talked about was how surprised I was, the clever, insightful, provocative, challenging, knowledgeable questions that I don't know who these people are. I'm never going to meet these people. But I just checked it, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing because I have nothing to base it against. I have done this once, but it says on the Reddit thing that 51,000 people have seen something or other, right? I don't know what those metrics mean. I don't know if that's good or bad, but what I know is there have been engagements with people not from BU, not from Boston, not from Massachusetts, not from the States, but elsewhere in the world that have seen and thought about vaccines in a different way because of what we did that day. And I'm really very proud of that because it was a great example of something which worked. And that then is good for BU. It's good for me, it's good for BU, it's good for the visibility of this. And it's actually good for the university because I would encourage you not to be afraid. Our marketing and communications within the university, I mean, I have experience in other places. It's really second to none. The support, the assistance, the help, getting this up and running, the team of people in that part of our university we should be incredibly proud of. And I just say that you should not be afraid if you think about doing this. They can guide, they can direct, they can teach you, they can say, just be careful about this. You don't have to answer all these questions. You don't have to go down this route. If you feel as if you're being attacked, or if you don't need to engage. They know, even though I didn't know what I was doing, I trusted them to know what they were doing, that they wouldn't put me in a place where they would make me or the university vulnerable, and they didn't do that. They were actually brilliant support. So that's my experience. That's my encouragement to you as you explore and think about what you would do. I'm not a Facebook Liver. Maybe I should try that. But in the normal way of being an experimental academic, I would say just experiment, just play and see what happens, and don't be afraid about these platforms. They're really very useful. Is that what you want?
That's perfect.
All right, good. That's what you want. That means it's all right.
And since we worked with you, Paul, we put together guides.
Oh, yes, that's
right. We
right.
have an AMA guide and a Facebook Live guide that came out of some experiences setting these up with professors and faculty and kind of the common questions that we were getting. We have copies here today, too, that we're happy to hand out. So, you know, we're here to help one-on-one, but also we have some materials that you can kind of self-service.
Yeah, they told me about that. Maggie told me about that at the back. I mean, it makes complete sense to do that. You work it out as you go along, okay? This is what happens. You do something, you realise that this is good, I learned during the day. We started at, what time did we start? At 12 o'clock? Yeah. So we started at 12, and it sort of took off a little bit, and then nothing really happened. And on the commute on the train on the way home, my phone was going like bananas. And then I realised that there's even those parts of things that you would learn about. When's the best time of the day? When are the people who... There's probably many things that you can think about. And again, the guys in the office can really help you think about that. So anyway, that was my experience.
Thanks, Paul. Tammy, do you want to tell us a little bit about Facebook Live?
Sure. So you've covered quite a lot. A lot of the encouragement I was going to offer too.
I didn't cover Facebook Live. You
I know, not the Facebook Live.
You sell Facebook
Live. So I haven't actually done any of the Reddit AMAs, but I have done a couple of the Facebook Lives that have been produced and distributed from here in this building just down the hall. So my research is political communication. So I come at this from two very, I wouldn't say different directions, but from very clear directions. One is through the communication side of things. I obviously teach my students a lot about reaching the audiences where they live, and you've kind of touched a little bit, Liz and Paul both touched a little bit about, where can you get to your audiences. And so when Margaret first approached me for the first Facebook Live idea, I thought, this is fantastic. What it was a conversation between two professors about the presidential election. So on the one hand, I thought, yay, great, this is wonderful. We actually get to talk online to people who are interested, who have questions that they get to send in. But then very quickly after that, I started thinking, well, you know what Facebook and Twitter and all of the sort of social media is also known for? trolls and angry bursts of lack of depth conversations. And so on the one hand, I was thinking, I'm a little afraid of getting into something like this because you never know who's going to then start trolling you and stalking you and following you all over the place on social media based on something that you might say that they either agree with or disagree with. And you don't know what kind of potentially vitriolic things are going to actually happen on the site. So there's a little bit of uncertainty, but very quickly after that I thought, you know, we complain so much about the lack of substance, particularly in political communication, although in lots of different areas as well. But you know, right now in the current political climate, we talk a lot about superficiality, about nobody kind of pushing back, and that everybody's just throwing out words out there and that there's no engagement. So I thought, how irresponsible would it be of me, who has made her life's work looking at political communication, to not then engage and actually try to offer some of the substance and try to actually respond to some of the questions. Whether or not somebody's going to actually listen to what I have to say with an open mind, I'm still going to put it out there because that's my responsibility, my duty. And I think that's, you've kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of that's what we are supposed to be doing. You know, the days of like living in the ivory tower and being disdainful of the, you know, sort of sharing your work in sort of public ways is just gone. That's gone. We should be doing that. We should be embracing it. And so I very happily joined in the conversation. We had the first of the Facebook Lives was, I think it was about a week before the presidential election, at which point the Cubs were in the World Series, and there were some oddly prophetic comments about the Cubs winning the World Series versus President Trump's, or then candidate Trump's ability to win the presidency. So that became kind of an interesting thing that came back to bite us in the second round that we did in Trump's first 100 days. And so it was kind of an interesting thing because we got a lot of support, a lot of structure. One of the things that I found was really, really helpful about doing Facebook Live is that it's actually happening at that moment. Not having done the Reddit AMAs, I'm actually kind of learning about that, so you're not actually doing it in sort of real time the same way that a Facebook Live is, where you're responding to whatever somebody's sending in. So that becomes a little bit different. So this is a nice compact sort of moment in time that you, or commitment in time that you have. You're doing it for half an hour or an hour, whatever the time frame was set. You get to have some exchange. People will post messages or questions, and you get to respond to them. And the lovely crew here, who I can't say enough good things about, are really good about picking good, evocative, but not trolling kinds of questions for you. So they give you things that you actually can expand upon that sometimes are a little pushy. And people are like, oh, you liberal college professors, can't you say something nice about Trump? And it's like, you know, so then you have to respond to those kinds of things as well. So there was a nice mix. It wasn't all fluffy questions. There were some hard-hitting things, but it also gave a lot of structure to the conversation. It was actually a really good time. And we got a whole lot of people who chimed in with comments afterwards, with views. We had views that also people would watch later on, so it wasn't as though people could only watch it during the live event. But it was a really, really wonderful experience and a great way to engage in a contemporary topic, because you can't publish a paper on Trump's 100 days on the 100th day of his time in office. And so to be able to really give contemporary thoughts, to think about things in the context, to talk about what people are actually talking about in that time frame, and having nice exchanges, I thought was very, very valuable and useful, and a nice contribution to the public sphere, right, and our conversations in it. So I would strongly encourage you to not be fearful about Facebook Live, because even though it kind of sounds a little daunting to be live on streaming and having all these people potentially watching you and maybe getting angry or whatever, it really is a valuable experience and a good way to share your knowledge with a wealth of people that you otherwise wouldn't be able to necessarily reach. So I'm a big proponent of it and a big fan. And I'm kind of eager to try these AMAs now. They sound like really fun.
And Tammy, did you mention to us that you had some media inquiries following it as well?
Yeah, so what happened is after the first, I get obviously a lot of media inquiries anyway, but there were some specific folks who actually from different places, including the Spanish-speaking version of the AP, the EFE, that contacted me and specifically said that they'd seen what we were doing on the Facebook Live feed and would I give them commentaries on different things. And that's turned into actually a long-term relationship where I've had basically almost every time a major speech or a major communication event happens in politics, these folks still come back to me to ask for my insight and analysis. And so it's been really, really useful in terms of promoting my work, and also being able to be active beyond just the Facebook Live moment too. So having had that contact, so that's just one example. There were a handful of folks who said specifically that it was the Facebook Live that they found me on, and so I thought that was extremely useful too. And it also means that people are looking, and not just, random folks who are sitting at home and scrolling through Facebook, but there are press folks out there and others that are looking at the information that we're providing. So I think that's a great thing. So yes, thanks for
kind of the
reminding me.
cross between the social media and traditional media, right?
Yeah, it's a lovely blend. So they feed off each other quite nicely. So that's great.
And I think that is true about social media. Again, you don't know where it necessarily leads. So just as a follow-on, just made me think about where I ended up with it. I'm now looking after the American Society for Virology, which is a big professional society. I'm now looking after their communications committee and managing their Twitter account, working with individuals across the country to promote the society. And that, I mean, I couldn't do that if I had not evolved through just trying and being experimental by myself. And I've already been trying to work out whether or not there's any potential that we can incorporate an AMA, for example, at our annual meeting. Because again, for all of the reasons that you say. So I think being a little, again, experimental and just seeing where it goes is really very interesting.
Josh, do you want to take it over?
Alrighty, so it's interesting. I don't know if you can tell, but the panel kind of moves from more sophisticated to least sophisticated, and I'm like the one all and have no clue what I am doing. As you heard, I run the Transgender Center down at Boston Medical Center, and the kind of my niche there as an academic physician is trying to be the boring, sober person in a field which is very political. I'm often the only person wearing a tie, and thinking about how to bring the field into conventional medicine, into conventional education, viewing it from a conventional scientific perspective, trying to not be political, trying to explain how people with wide ranges of political views should just come together because aren't we scientists and shouldn't we test some of these things? And so that's kind of the hat I wear in that world. And what struck me about these social media pieces is that they actually create an opportunity then to reach out in a field where it's mostly social media conversations among people who have no clue what they're talking about, arguing in a very political way. And if I limit myself to just my, I started by limiting myself to conventional methodology in order to have my credibility and publish papers and peer-reviewed journals and things like that, there's really a very limited audience. I've taken advantage of the BU corporate communications group because it's such a popular topic to take some of these papers that I think have interesting results and get them out into the media. But there could be a tiny little health article, one paragraph in one paper, and God knows if that resonates or anybody reads that. Honestly, despite the view that what I'm saying here, like I said initially, am pretty naive to the whole thing. I didn't go looking for any of this. I'm still a little bit surprised I even said yes. I don't even know who asked me to do the AMA thing. You apparently know it's Piper. I don't even know if Piper's a man or a woman.
She's actually a professor of genetics at Vandy.
Oh, okay, perfect. And here I'm like agreeing to this thing, and I'm very cognizant of how naive I was and how much my hand was held. So having an operation that can do good hand holding is really enormous. So I did one Reddit and one Facebook Live, and the Reddit clearly was very publicized because people were just waiting to be on it, and then people had large numbers of questions. You know, for me, these are very large numbers. Like I'm in transgender medicine, so it's kind of a niche field, and like I got 30 citations on a paper. By contrast, there were I think there were 4,500 questions that got asked during just that one day. That was just like an 8-hour day or something like that. And there were, I think, 140,000 people read that thing that day. So, so just a very, very big, like a little bit of an intimidating audience. And I was pretty naive. You know, I got on at noon. I said I would do this for I was limiting my time. You know, I would do this for 1 hour at noon, 1 hour at 5 o'clock. And I was just hurrying away, trying to answer all those questions, being very, very serious and thoughtful, and actually appreciating having the opportunity to do that. And again, the moderating was enormous because I was not dealing with any trolls or any, you know, there might be hostile questions, but if they were hostile questions, they were legit. They were sober, constructive, as it were. And then that went on for about an hour. And then I came back again at about 5 o'clock or so, and I thought I'd do another hour, but it was kind of fun. It's you know, it was more than fun. It's really invigorating to have people who are actually curious about a subject and being serious in their questions and asking the naive questions that they're afraid to ask. So let me just point out another element to this whole thing, which is that the people asking the questions are anonymous. So therefore, I'm getting questions from people. You know, people. They're not all people out to attack the field. These are people asking naive or maybe using the wrong language or misgendering or all these kinds of things in a fraught world. But this is an opportunity for them to do that when they have genuine questions, because maybe they know somebody who's trans or they heard the topic and they're just wondering how serious it is, or they have some connection or another and they want to ask essentially embarrassing questions. And so those things were coming through, and I got very appreciative of that kind of dynamic that I usually only have the opportunity to do one-on-one, let's say, with one patient in the room with the door closed when they can ask their embarrassing questions, and now somebody could do this in a much bigger way. And I don't know, I went on for like 2 or 3 hours, and then like somebody who was moderating, because again, I'm completely naive, and like I didn't even get, like there's like Big Brother around me. I'm like Truman on the Truman Show, you know? Somebody's like, are you going to leave work ever? You know, one of the moderators, like I didn't even know they were out there. We're all still moderating, knocking off trolls. Do you want to go home? Then we, you know, I got to like question number 200. Not that I answered them all, but I scrolled that far down, and then I think that I felt very accomplished, and we declared that at the end. But I've had subsequent then connection after that, not so much media and such, although there's that too, but just people who've read it and who have read it. That's why it's Reddit, maybe. In general, because it's there permanently, and those questions are there, and the answers are there, and that's and it's, you know, it's like it's almost better than Wikipedia. You Google those questions, and you will just pop right into it and get some of that answered. And so I see that among my patients and among others who are interested in the field. With regard to the Facebook Live, I had even less connection. I have no clue how I just got pulled along for the ride on that one too. I just was told to wear my tie and sound professorial when I spoke, that also was very moderated, and I think that's another important point. Is it's true that these things come in real time, but if you've got somebody kind of going through those questions and picking out the ones that would expand the conversation, you know, so it's kind of a big team effort, because there were those of us who were sitting like this, right in front of the microphone, facing the camera, and then then we needed other support people actually looking through with the questions very, very quickly, and keeping it all very, very constructive. And there's an audience for that too. And again, large numbers of people. There was advertising in advance, and large numbers of people curious about the topic. So the numbers of people reached are again cuckoo high numbers from my humble perspective.
Yeah, and your AMA actually got picked up along with, it was a week of transgender health, and Teen Vogue actually wrote a piece about it, which 2 years ago would maybe not be something to brag about, but it reaches a huge population of people now, of young people who are really interested and engaged, which was really nice too.
Yeah, very. I was impressed. Very, very awesome, in fact.
And Liz, I had a question for you. Do you want to talk a little bit about from the moderator side, kind of what the work you're doing in the background, upvoting, downvoting, or kind of keeping it on the up and up to make sure that the conversation is of a certain caliber?
Sure. So this is going to vary from sub to sub, of course, because each sub is run by a team of volunteers. No one's paid, and they have their own rules. But on Our Science, we have done a lot of SciComm research and looked at the fact that when certain kinds of comments are coming in, when people, for example, read a media piece, like a journal piece about science, and then there are comments underneath it that are really derogatory and antagonistic, it changes people's perceptions of the science. And so we've been using that and actually working with some science communication professors to think about how we should curate comments. And so on our end, we actually have a set of rules that are very well publicized, and even people who get really angry about free speech on the internet at least respect that our rules are very clear and we're very consistent with the way we enforce them. We don't allow any grandstanding about pseudoscience. Of course, you can ask questions, and difficult questions at that, but people don't get to come on there and just rant about how vaccines are unsafe or call you a bad name. There's no bigotry or hatred. We expect you to behave and be respectful and polite. You can ask as many difficult questions as you want, as long as you're respectful and polite. And also, it's just no memes, no jokes. It's not a place for these off-topic tangents about your favorite kind of cheeseburger or something like that, which happens sometimes. We had, for example, a post about crayfish, and we removed over 100 comments that just said, that's cray, or something along those lines. Or that's fish cray, or all these different things. So it helps ensure that there's a curated conversation. It also means that we're helping the scientist who's doing the AMA. We help you develop the little message that you're going to have at the beginning, that's sort of a bio that says what you've done, who you are, making sure that it's in lay enough language that the public can get what you're saying. Sometimes when people submit it at first, it's like an abstract for a conference, which is not what the general public can read, right? And then we help give you some tips and guides about how to engage, because there are upvotes and downvotes on Reddit. So the way that it's slightly different from other forums, even though they stole this from a previous incarnation of a forum site, is that you can vote on stuff. So people can submit either external links or a text-based post, which is what AMAs are, which is like a question or a comment or an Ask Me Anything. And then people can leave comments and have chains of comment conversations underneath that. Everyone who's a user who's logged in can vote either up or down on both the submission and then each comment. And so there's an algorithm that makes the really popular stuff rise to the top and the less popular stuff kind of fall to the bottom. So as mods, we're going to remove anything that's really inappropriate, but we also help kind of guide you that we often post the AMA in the morning, and then you'll come back in a couple hours after generated questions and some votes, and you can see what are the most popular questions. If you ignore the most popular questions, you'll get a lot of criticism, for example. That happened when Obama did his AMA. He ignored some of the tough questions and answered that he talks about the beer that he makes, right? Which is interesting, but not really what people wanted to know. So we give you some guidance about how to do things that will make Redditors happy. We're always on hand if you have problems or questions. You can send us something. And then sometimes we actually go and we're there with you if you need help. So if there's someone here locally who's a mod, they can help. AAAS, actually, you might be interested in this, for our society annual meeting that we have every year at AAAS. We actually do AMAs with our scientists in the expo hall, and we project on a screen like that the AMA, and people can actually watch in live time as the scientists do the AMAs.
So that's interesting, because this is the one in Austin, is this correct? So I'm speaking at that next week. It's an interesting needle connection and emerging infectious diseases, and I'm sure we've had some communication internally with that, but yeah, that will be interesting to see. We should connect on that.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be helping Gotti a little bit.
Yeah, that would be cool to see you.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're just organising our lives here.
Don't
worry about us.
So we wanted to open questions up to the audience. If you have any questions, there'll be some mics going around. you want to raise your hand.
And even as people are getting organized, I just want to touch on something. We got a little bit of this from Paul. It's kind of important, I think, as us as educators to be out there educating people. Isn't that what a lot of us want to do, whether we do it as scientists or as teachers? And this is really that. And I know certainly in my field, there are people who are who know the material well, but are shy about articulating it in these kinds of formats. And so it's important. It's good if you can be that person who can be a little bit of the interface between the credible, knowledgeable scientific world and but also unafraid to be out there communicating.
And actually, if I can kind of piggyback on that for just a quick second, one of the things I will say about maybe a word of caution is to keep in mind that a lot of times with what the folks that you're going to be reaching out to, if you're using these kinds of platforms, might not be, as we've shown in some of the examples, well-educated, steeped in the language of the research. And so it's partially your job to help them along to learn some of that language, but it's also partially your job to help sort of translate to more sort of common vernacular so that they can understand. So you want to speak as a knowledgeable expert, but also be able to make the content accessible to the broader audience. And so I think that's a very interesting and important balance that you need to be able to reach if you're going to do something like this in a successful kind of way.
So therefore, I happily answered the question, hard or soft tacos, even though it was nothing to do with vaccines. I don't know if that was a good thing to do or a bad thing to do, but for me, it's like, yeah, why not answer the question?
Well, there's a lot of research that like humanizing scientists and helping them see you as a person is really valuable.
And that's the problem. I think that's the difficulty, and that's the obligation. It really is the obligation, our obligation.
Right, that's one of the popular questions on Reddit is cake or pie,
Is
right?
it?
Right. Yeah, it
Way to
changes.
really cut down
you know.
to the important matters, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Are there any questions?
Hi. I have a couple questions. First, I was wondering how involved BU was in helping you to establish these things, and if there's protocol with that, I guess. And then the second thing is what your timeline looked like. So from the moment where you're like, hey, maybe I should do one of these things, how long did it take to reach out to someone and set everything up?
I think it varies a little bit from the different panelists. I don't know, Paul, I know we worked very closly with
Yeah,
with
I
you.
mean, I couldn't have done it without the support of the of Maggie and Carol. We just couldn't have done it. They were organised to reach out, and this is something that I won't spot, right? As just an academic trying to think about what has to happen in the lab or papers or grants or whatever. I won't know, really. I didn't know that National Immunisation Month was coming up. But that's why we have you guys to look through that, to think, okay, this is coming. That's the level of support that you get from the university. That's great, right? That's the way it should be, because I will just miss that sort of thing easily. Then they reached out. They said, "Would you do it?" I don't know. Did I say I would do it fast? Did I? I must have replied quickly then. And honestly, it just was like then dominoes. It was organised. We met beforehand. I got pulled off the roof in terms of panicking about the drone. And it just then went very, very smoothly. They're a great resource. Yeah. They really are a great resource.
As a plug for the office, if you have any ideas or you're interested, you can email social@bu.edu or pr@bu.edu. It's the same people checking both inboxes. And really, as far as the timeline, it doesn't take a long time to set up and do. I mean, you can really decide and do it within 24 hours if you wanted to. We do stress, or we recommend, that you have I would say 2 to 3 weeks plan time, just so you can start thinking about how you want to promote it across your other channels. You know, if you are, if you do diabetes research and you are connected with the American Diabetes Association, we're happy to reach out to them and see if they'll share it on their channels. And that background conversation to get things promoted takes a little bit of time. So having a week or two is certainly helpful. I know a lot of folks, as far as the time of actually doing it, they can set aside 1 hour, they can set aside 2 hours. Often they'll come back and see if there's additional questions. So from the AMA perspective, I think a lot of it's pretty friendly to your schedule. For Facebook Live, we generally run them about half hour to 40 minutes. And again, we try to promote those in advance.
When I've done it, I've done an AMA on Ask Historians, because I did research with Haitian immigrants, but part of that process meant I had to learn a lot about Haitian history and the history of African diaspora. So I actually did an AMA there and ended up actually being a guest on one of their podcasts as well. And that was a great experience. I know that a sub like that, you have a lot of people who are really interested in history and have a lot of really in-depth questions, and they expect on that kind of sub, because know your audience, they expect a lot of citations, for example. So I spent some time ahead of time putting together some bibliographies, looking up some names, so that when people ask me questions, I could say, oh yeah, you have to read this piece, it's got it right here, here's a quote, that kind of thing. So part of it means, when you're working with a team, if you decide to reach out, making sure that you're doing your AMA or your Facebook Live or something on Twitter or even Snapchat, like if you want to do a story or something, making sure you're doing it, also targeting the right audience for you, and then learning about that audience and thinking about what they expect, right? But I think almost on any of them, people like to have more information they can look up. So, if you can link to information on the CDC site and that kind of thing, that's valuable for people who want to investigate a little bit further. And that takes just a little bit of time to put together and think about how you might explain things. I'm an academic and I'm an anthropologist, so I like to research communities and I like to figure out what questions they have and think about that a little bit before I go in. But you don't have to. You don't have to be as nerdy as me about it. You have a team here who can help you. In our science, you have to just find a spot on our calendar. We usually only do 1 AMA a day now, just to make sure the others don't get drowned out. But other subs like IAMA will have tons a day. So it kind of depends where you're targeting for how long you might have to schedule ahead, but it is very flexible.
The other thing that I meant to say was, whenever I was talking, I said you don't have to answer the question. The other thing, which is, I think, very good, is to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. That's really not a problem as well. So you can do the research beforehand. If you haven't been fortunate enough to pull the paper, it's easy to say, I don't know. If I have the chance, I'll look it up. And people are quite happy with that as well. It's controllable. It's not like a big time sink. It is controllable. It doesn't take over your life.
But I would think it also depends on your topic area as well and which format you're using. For example, I have to, by virtue of the work that I do, I have to basically be constantly keeping up with politics and what's going on, current events anyway. And so to say, oh, can you come in and have a conversation with somebody else who's also interested and keeps up with current events about this particular part of what's happening. That really didn't take any extra time of mine, and it was really, really enjoyable because sometimes, you're getting so bogged down in the day-to-day of your research or your teaching or whatever else might be going on in your life that you don't get to have those kinds of conversations. And so for me, it was really about an hour of actual committed time to this, which was the whole deal. Showing up, having a little sip of water before, making sure we look good on camera, that kind of stuff, and then just having the conversation. And so I think it depends on your topic area too and what you're actually doing with it. If it's conversational, like Facebook Live, that can really be very rewarding for I don't want to say like little output, but at the same time, not a whole lot of time commitment, and still very good experience all the way around. So.
Yeah, and to the I don't know idea, there's even more than that, which is we're thinking about areas that ought to be investigated further. And so sometimes the answer is, that's a great question, I share your question, and we ought to be investigating that. That's kind of the ground up, as you were talking about. What do people really want to know?
Mm-hmm. Is there another question?
So because you're dealing with such a high volume of interactions, there has to be a moment where you say something or you write something where in hindsight you're like, man, I wish I would have said that better, or I didn't really mean that. Paul, I'm looking at the questions that's up there, is this a priority? So you might say something, but then later on think, oh, I should have said I think it's a priority, but other people might not. How do you mitigate that risk?
Yeah, I guess, did we say this when we were talking about it? The internet is forever. That's what we try to teach. That's what I try to teach my daughter. I just think you have to be careful, but it's the same as any part of life, right? The easiest way to make sure you don't make a mistake and say something wrong is just to shut up and say nothing. But that's not going to be any sort of communication. That's not going to help anybody if you just basically don't speak. I just think you have to be careful, and you have to be aware that sometimes things can go. I think you do need to have that support that we had of just be careful with this, or just because you think about this. I am not an MD, right? I shouldn't be given health advice. This is not health advice. This is not.
Yeah, I'm thinking too, there's also email rules. So if you're the kind of person who hits send before you reread your email, then this is a problem, and you should pay attention. And if you're already kind of good about that and double checking, is this something that could actually go in the Boston Globe before you hit send, in case the person you're writing to, not that they're mad at you, but they're a moron and they forward it. The same concept, I think, goes there. And so just proofreading each time before you hit submit is the way I would handle it. The other thing is it's a little asynchronous for Reddit, at least. So it's not like you're going back and forth with these people. They're not IMing you. You have these questions that rose to the top because they got a lot of votes, and then you're showing up like 2 hours later and answering. And maybe there will be some additional conversation about your answer later, but you may never see that, or if you do, you'll see that when you come back later in the day. So you're not tempted, I guess, to have this knee-jerk reaction necessarily.
Yeah. And if you're doing Facebook Live, where it is a live situation where you're just responding and you don't have the sort of ability to sit there and say, okay, I'm going to think out my answer completely before I give it and let me spell check that. Obviously you're not, because you're saying it out loud. But the idea is that you still are going to take a moment. If somebody asks you a question, just like in any conversation, just like in the classroom, when a student asks you a question, you take a moment to think about your answer. That's totally reasonable on a Facebook Live kind of exchange. You, of course, don't want to wait too long, and you do need to respond pretty quickly. But the other part is be willing to be responsible for your answer. The same way you would be in a classroom or anywhere else, be willing to be responsible, so you speak responsibly. You can't always sort of get the right wording all the time. There'll be times when, even after this, I'll go home and on the train ride home, I'll be like, oh, I should have said, or oh, I should have said this more eloquently, or I can't believe I used so many gestures. Yeah.
Really?
But we do that, I know, but we do that anyway. Yeah. And so you gotta just sort of be willing to kind of think about the cost-benefit analysis. The answer is don't say anything if you're going to be afraid to speak. But then if you're doing that, how responsible are you being to your discipline, to your public, to the work that you're doing? And so you kind of have to balance out the potential to make an error or the potential to not be terribly eloquent at times with the actual ability to get out the information and to potentially help inform other people.
The embarrassing laugh on the podcast permanently there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say for Reddit specifically, one thing that's very valuable to think about, you always want to personalize your questions and actually answer the question, right? You want to personalize your answers. But also always think about that third party, all the other millions of people who might be looking at this, right? And like they said, be thoughtful about what you're writing, proofread it, think about it. You can always, if you're working with a team, ask someone else to look at it before you hit send and say, does this read okay? If you're working on something that's really sensitive, you can also ask someone who's really social media literate to help make sure you avoid certain terminology that you might not know are problems. I just had this conversation in my job with a team at Harvard that's going to do a congressional briefing on race and genetics, which is obviously a very sensitive topic. And I gave them an entire list of things that are sort of dog whistles and terms that they want to be thoughtful to make sure they avoid, or ways of framing things that are going to be problematic about these issues that they were just not aware of, because they don't deal with trolls on the internet, right? So it's really helpful to have a team who can help you with that, or just even a friend or a colleague who can look at it if it's something you're really worried about. But you can also follow up, come back to the AMA later that day, like some of the people here have. And if people seem to have gotten the wrong impression, jump in and clarify. Say, oh, actually, that's not what I meant. It's a conversation, and dialogue is what all the science communication experts say we're all supposed to be doing, actually back and forth, right? So be a part of it.
Yeah, never be afraid to admit that you're wrong or you didn't mean it. That's real life. That's the reality. Everybody gets it wrong at some point.
Yeah, not to scare anyone, but we often find that tweets or a response in the AMA can also be picked up in traditional media as well. So, it's social media, it's public, it's reaching a broad audience, which is one of the goals, but then one of the things to keep in mind is that it's reaching a broad audience and that it can also be reprinted other places too. So it is definitely something to be thoughtful about. Do we have another question over here?
I work at the Global Programs Office here at BU, and we're made up of mostly staff members, not necessarily faculty members, doing research and publishing academic papers. That being said, we do have staff members that have extensive experience in things like immigration that are hot topics in the news. So do you think Reddit or Facebook Live AMAs would be a good fit for an office like ours?
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
So for example, if you have a particular topic, think about the goals, right? What are you doing this for? Do you just want to inform people about a specific hot topic issue? Do you want to bring awareness about the program? Do you want to correct some misinformation about certain issues? Maybe all three. And then you can work with a team to think about where would be a good fit for what your goals are, right? But yeah, absolutely. And on my sub, we have a lot of people who come in and talk about not just a new study they've done, but things like issues within the sciences. We've had Shirley Malcolm come in and talk about the problem of inclusion and equity in the science, which is a huge issue in the sciences right now, right? Or always has been. And even though it might not be, she hasn't done original research on this since like the 70s, she's incredibly well informed on this and in touch with everything. And she runs programs that help address these issues. So, they can help you find the right sub. You can also, if you want, I'll give you my card, and I'm happy to help you find a good sub for different things. And maybe someone can talk about Facebook, but it sounds like what Tammy did could be something that your program could do too, this kind of conversation about a hot topic.
And the thought, I think, would come to how you might publicize it. I think relating again to the question, how much lead time do you need? These are areas of our expertise heavily, so they don't necessarily require a lot of lead time from that perspective, but the publicity perhaps does, figuring out how you're going to get an audience to even know that you did this. And that might be your big strategy. If you have something out there, how are you going to communicate that in advance and get people to pay attention?
Yeah, as an example, we through our office work closely with faculty. We also try to do a lot of community building, and we use the same tools and platforms for that as well. So I believe it was December, we did a Facebook Live with admissions, so folks could ask questions, right? And by folks, I mean prospective students. And we chose Facebook Live first over Reddit because we thought that we'd be able to target the students better on that platform. We thought that's maybe where they already were, as opposed to Reddit, where you would have to pick a subreddit. We already had that following through the admissions Facebook page and the BU main Facebook page. And I think people are looking for information. It doesn't necessarily need to be a professor or a scientist. If you have great information about studying abroad or global programs or what to do to prepare for that, there's an audience out there that's interested in asking questions directly. Is there any other questions?
Hi. So you mentioned that for AMAs that they would generally be open to go back and correct comments later, but at some point it would generally be inactive or closed. Which way would you say it is more common for AMAs to die? Would they be? intense phrasing, not my intention. Would it be more of like a mutual decision between the moderators and the person who is answering the questions, or is it just a natural dying out of attention?
I mean, so there are a few things that can happen. I guess first, we can actually close comments if it's something that's a really contentious topic and we want to sleep and not have to moderate it, right? So you can close comments and people can still vote, but they can't comment. And so that might be something that we would do for like an issue that was really hot and that we were having to have a whole bunch of people moderating constantly. The other thing that can happen is, I think after a year, Reddit doesn't let you comment on it any longer anyway. Just for their own server issues, you can no longer comment after a certain period. The in-between is Reddit is very much about what's new, and part of the algorithm actually constantly, like there's a decay piece to the algorithm, right? And so there are AMAs, like Kevin Folta, who is a professor that studies GMOs at Florida. He will come back for days answering questions on the AMAs, and then he'll follow the links to like the conspiracy subs, and like debate them there, and he gets really into it. But most people just come for the day, right? And so the conversations may continue for a few more days, and then eventually people's attention goes elsewhere. That's typically with the life cycle of an AMA.
Sure. I know too, Paul, I believe for yours, I think we have the screenshot. When you were wrapping up, you said you were wrapping up, right? You say like, thank you, it's been a great...
We were able to do that. So I didn't know what the commitment was. The commitment at lunchtime was short. It ramped up on the train. It went crazy in the evening. And then I thought, well, this is sort of interesting. Let it run. And then maybe after 2 days, I said, well, that just has to be... I had to get back to work. but yeah, it's controllable. I mean, again, you can control it. It doesn't need to take over your life.
Could you say a little bit about how these things are organized, like what the various subs are, how many subs are there, how you decide which sub you're going to put your stuff in? Do you have to ask anybody to be in a particular sub? What if somebody puts it in the wrong place? Or I just don't really understand how it's organized.
Yeah, I mean, Reddit is systems of like thousands of different subs that can be very hard to find, right? So it's these sub forums, and then there is sort of the front page, which is there's an algorithm that takes the most active conversations happening around the entire site and then puts them, kind of ranks them. And you can see like what are the most popular things on the internet today, right? And a lot of times the memes and jokes and videos and all that will show up on Facebook the next day and that kind of thing. It's often an instigator for certain things. It can be really hard sometimes to find those subs that you want. There used to be something called defaults, which were when you signed up, you were automatically subscribed to a certain set, and you could change that, but most people are lazy. Our Science was one of them, and there were a number of other big ones, and that kind of gave you a set of what the most popular subs were. Now that they don't have that, it's a little bit harder, but again, they're very aware of what subs would be appropriate for you and how to figure that out and what would not be. I could talk about examples of AMAs that went poorly, perhaps because someone didn't pick well, but that's not something you're going to run into if you work with someone here. And like Our Science is great, our Ask Historians is great. If you want to do our Ask Philosophy, this might not surprise you, but philosophers like to debate, so there's a lot of debate there, but that's also a really run one. Ask Science, and then there's smaller focused ones, like if you just want to reach out, for example, let's say you're putting together something like a panel at a conference that's focused on astronomy. You could go to the astronomy sub where people who are astronomers might be and ask them and ping them and say, hey, let's have a conversation about stuff, right? So the team can help you find that. You could also email me and I can help you. But yeah, each sub is kind of its own little kingdom. The moderators get to choose the rules, how they're going to enforce them. And it makes sense. Like if you go to Our Cats and people are posting pictures of dogs, that would be confusing, right? You're there for cat pictures. So, there's a reason for the rules. It helps you you're going to spaces for different kinds of content. But yeah, it's a little overwhelming at first if you're not familiar with forum sites, and it's very ugly and old school. So definitely it can help to have someone, a grad student or the team here, to kind of hold your hand through it if you've never done it. or just play on it for a while before you actually go in.
And we found, and it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective as a mod, but we found that we do a lot of the AMAs in the IAMA because it's pretty open, the scheduling is not as tough, and then we cross-promote them in subreddits that are more specific to that topic. So an example would be around the MLB playoffs, we did a AMA with Andy Andres, who's a sabermetrician, and so we did it in the AMA, but then we went over to the baseball subreddit to say, hey, this is happening over here. Come, ask him his questions. And then we also did for the I forget who it was, the 2 teams that were in the playoffs or the World Series, we posted in the subreddit for each too. So it's, I think there's a lot of different ways to go about it, and you can keep it as targeted or as broad as you want to, depending on how you continue to promote it.
Yeah, cross-posting is a great way to let people know about something that's happening in a sub they may not be subscribed to. So, and then you can post, you can tweet about it, you can put on Facebook, you can do all that too.
Hi, Liz. Could you talk a little bit about just the moderator community? Like, how does one become the moderator of cat videos? Is it kind of like Wikipedia, where the number of discussions you are in somehow kind of increases your equity? I don't know.
A little bit. I mean, I first got involved in Reddit because I just sort of stumbled upon some anthropology subs, and people were asking questions and answering them, but they were wrong. And so people were wrong on the internet, and I felt like I should join and correct it. And I just started answering a lot of questions in depth. I was a grad student. I was taking ProSim and all these graduate level courses in these topics, and so I could really go into depth. And I got asked to be a moderator because I was so active anyway. Like, why not, right? And eventually, you kind of sometimes move up to bigger and bigger subs. So the anthropology subs, as you might imagine, are not that big, whereas our science is huge. Now, some of the subs actually have, like, when they realize they need more moderators, there'll actually be an application, and people actually have to fill out an application that has survey questions and that kind of thing. Some of them are much more strict than others about this. But the community, actually, our science community at least, is fantastic. We are all on a Slack together because we have all these different setups so that we can actually do a lot of the moderating, even removing whole posts and comments and stuff like that from Slack. But allows us to have conversations about, difficult decisions, like, is this title sensationalized or not? Like, let's have a debate about it. But we're also all friends now, and we're also like Facebook friends, and we go invite each other to each other's weddings and stuff like that. It's actually become a really nice community. We meet in real life and hang out. And I believe that's true for a lot of the different subs as well, especially the big ones that are very active. But there's also a life cycle. I mean, people have lives and things happen. So not surprisingly, people sometimes drop out, because they got a job or they had kids or, they just can't dedicate hours a day to an internet site that they don't get paid for.
Can I ask a question? So what sort of numbers, how many people are you talking about? Those moderators, is it like 200 or 100 or 50 or?
So for our science, we actually have tiers of moderators. So we have over 1,400 moderators who at least have an undergraduate degree in the sciences or something related. And then we have almost 7,000 people who've actually proven to us what their degrees are in one way or another. They've actually doxed themselves and proven who they are in real life. And then we give them a flare that indicates their highest education level and what their degree expertise is. But we have over 1,400 people who can at least remove bad comments. So we'll put a call out when we're doing something like the Transgender Health Week, where we knew there'd be a lot of trolls. We're like, look, we need all hands on deck. Then we have different tiers of people who have different levels of permissions. So people like me can do almost anything on the sub, including demodding people, like removing them as moderators if they misbehave and that kind of thing, down to the people who can only remove comments. So the people who have full permissions, I think we're at about 12 that are active. And then we try to work with our community when we make big decisions about changes in the sub.
Is there one last question for the panelists? No? All right, well, I want to thank everyone for taking the time coming out tonight or this afternoon to talk to the audience and share your experience. So as mentioned, we have different handouts and guides if you're interested in taking those with you. We're happy to hang around and chat. So thank you very much.